All right, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, using Percy and CodeShip for visual testing with CI and CD. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know a few things up top. One, we are recording, so if for whatever reason you need to leave early or maybe you have a colleague who's unable to join, the recording will be made available later on. On top of that, we can also take questions at the end, but as soon as you think of one, feel free to put it right into the question panel. You don't have to wait until the end. Even if you think maybe we'll answer it during, please put it right in as soon as you think of it. There's also going to be a very short survey at the end, just a quick, what would you like to learn more about in the future kind of survey. That's going to happen at the very end when I close the session out. So everyone who's still on is going to be able to answer that for us. We'd love to know what you'd like to learn more about. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know this is part of the CloudBees Innovator Program. And what that is that we're doing this session with Percy because we believe in Percy's product, we believe in the company, what they're doing, and we're excited to share our partnership out with everyone, let you see what Percy's been up to. So David, can you go to the next slide, please? Don't want to take up too much more of your time. I'd like to introduce our speakers. We're going to be having David Jones, the Director of Engineering from Percy. He's the one you see on the webcam there. And we're also going to be having Ethan Jones, Product Management at CloudBees CodeShip. No relation as far as I know. And to get us started, Ethan, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Max. So on the slide here, I want to talk about what we're going to cover here today over the next hour, and then I'll give you, to start, a brief intro of what CodeShip is. So once I do that, I'll let David talk about what Percy is, maybe if you haven't heard about it, how it can fit into your workflow needs, how your teams can think about adopting it. And then we'll talk about using CodeShip and Percy together, why you might want to do that, how easy that can be, and David will give you a live demo end-to-end of exactly how to do that integration. And then at the end, we'll take your questions and hopefully have some good answers for you and give you some next steps if you want to try Percy and CodeShip together yourself. So then on the next slide, taking a look at what CodeShip specifically is. CodeShip is a CI/CD service provided by CloudBees. It's a SaaS, fully hosted, fully managed CI/CD service. And on the next slide, we can see that it's really CI/CD for modern teams. This means fast, easy, and flexible. CodeShip is meant to let you get going with CI/CD, automate your testing and deployment for your modern web apps within just a couple of minutes, but still let you grow and mature, and inside the CloudBees family overall, mature into really complete, large, mature workflows over time. So a little bit further on in the presentation, I'll take a look at how you configure CodeShip in more detail, and of course, you'll see part of that in the demo as well. But I actually want to hand it back to David so he can talk about what Percy is, why you might want to use it. If you've never heard of it, sort of a high-level look about why it might be something your teams are missing. CodeShip's been using it for a long time. So it's something we're excited to share.
Cool, thank you. So hello everyone, and yeah, thanks for joining in. Yeah, so today I want to kind of cover a little bit about Percy, what we're doing, and what we're building, and yeah, we'll go over a demo at the end and get it integrated into CodeShip here. So Percy is your all-in-one visual review and visual testing platform. And what it really does is it allows you to track visual changes across your web application, your component libraries, that sort of thing. And ultimately, visual testing allows you to catch visual regressions. And you might be wondering, like, what is actually a visual regression? Well, here you see we have a form with a button here, and clearly there's something broken here. There's no call to action on this button, and we don't know exactly what it does. And yeah, you just got to kind of step back for a moment and think, like, how would I actually currently test something like this and avoid shipping that to production? And one way that people might do this is they have a functional test that would load this page and then assert that there's a button on the page that has a text that says sign up, possibly in this case. But the problem is that this button actually does say sign up. It's just that we accidentally made the text color the same color as the button. And so Here, there's a very clear boundary between a visual regression and a non-visual regression. And so Percy allows you to catch all sorts of issues like this. And yeah, so this is exactly what we would call a visual regression. And maybe you are not doing functional tests either. And so what are some of the other ways that you might catch this sort of issue? Well, you might be doing some manual QA. You might have a pull request open for this change, and someone might open that pull request and be checking it, and maybe boot up this application on their local environment. But it requires that they really thoroughly check your application each time. They check it in multiple browsers, responsive widths, and so forth. So it becomes pretty time consuming to catch all this stuff, and ultimately just error prone. You're going to miss things easily if you're doing this manually. And the reality is that people do miss things all the time. Visual regressions happen to the best companies. Here is Google taking pre-orders for their latest Google Pixel phone, and you notice that the pre-order button is flowing off the bottom of the button here and doesn't look particularly good. Here's another one, RailsConf. Clearly this web page was not checked in a responsive width, and the text is flowing off the side of the screen here. And we also have this one here from 1Password, where the social links here have flowed off sort of on top of each other, and I imagine this is probably some sort of CSS float issue that we've got going on here. So yeah, it's very easy for anyone to make these sorts of mistakes and ship these things, and Percy helps a lot with avoiding these kind of issues. So how do we actually review visual changes that are being made in Percy? Well, here's our pretty typical build review screen. And so on the left-hand side here, you see what is sort of the original baseline screenshot of this particular index page. And on the right, you see the new screenshot. And yeah, if you click on the right-hand side, you can toggle on and off this Diff Mode that allows you to basically see the visual diff between the before and after of this particular change. And yeah, it's pretty useful to see this view, because if there are some subtle things that are going on here. And so yeah, these red pixels are what we call visual diffs, and yeah, literally any pixel that has changed from the left to the right, we will highlight and read here for you. So in addition to that, we are also allowing you to test over multiple responsive widths. So we're doing that each time, and you can configure this however you like. And we're also doing it across multiple browsers. So we have support for Chrome and Firefox at the moment, and allows you to track changes over there. So you can start to see just how much is being looked at each time that you run a build in Percy. We're talking about the number of snapshots that you're taking times the browser widths times the browsers that you have configured. So a tremendous amount of stuff that we're covering. And ultimately, you get to track and look over some pretty subtle changes, and pretty complicated UI states. So you can configure your tests however you please, but you can see that this is a screen that has a lot of, is composed of a lot of different components. And has a fair bit going on here, and we clearly have changed like this green color here, and it's had a pretty wide sweeping effect on the UI. And so, yeah, it's great to be able to test across these different and interesting kind of UI states. Yeah, and so once you've got this running, you know, of course, you want to be notified when there are changes to be reviewed, and so we allow you to connect up to GitHub and also GitLab, and you can get these really useful status checks on your, in this case in GitHub, which is calling out like, hey, this pull request has some changes to be reviewed. And so, yeah, that's really, really useful to have and provides really nice developer flow here. And so if you were to click the details there and once again, you've reviewed these changes, you can approve these changes by using the button on the top right. And once you approve those changes, then we can go ahead and mark the GitHub status there as green, and then that unblocks this pull request from being merged. So hopefully you get a feel there for exactly how the flow works and what it feels like to work with. It really does feel like a bit of a superpower, really, to be able to know that everything is being checked each time and have full confidence that when you hit the merge button on a pull request like that, you know exactly what pixels have been changed there visually. So that's a quick roundup of what Percy is and where it might fit into your workflow and what value it provides. You might be thinking and sitting there thinking, "Oh, this looks pretty good. You know, how do I get it built into my stack?" So we have a bunch of SDKs that that allow us to support a range of different test frameworks and component libraries. And so here are some of the popular ones, but we also support a whole bunch more, and we even have a document that allows you to build your own SDK. We've been working on a way to really centralize a lot of SDK development, and that makes it easy for you to extend in the future. So if there's something that's missing, it's a pretty high chance that you're going to be able to build something to get it working for you. And so, you know, in order to get this flow working super well in your environment, of course, you're going to want continuous integration. And I think that this is like an absolutely key point for integrating Percy, is that as a developer, you want for every commit that you're making, you want to see the consequences or the benefits of the change that you're making, and that needs to run each time. So I'm going to hand it back to Ethan now to talk about how you can go about configuring CodeShip to get that to work.
Awesome, thanks, David. So CodeShip configuration to get your automated continuous integration and continuous delivery workflow working is very simple. If there's one takeaway about CodeShip, that's probably the most important thing. CodeShip is simple and tries very hard to make it easy for you to get back to work on your main important features. Continuous integration, continuous delivery should be means to an end to let you prioritize your time and ship the highest quality code possible. There's a couple ways to configure CodeShip, which I'll look at in just a moment. But here on the next slide, one thing I want to highlight, if you're not super familiar with CodeShip overall yet, the documentation is a great place to start. We've got documentation for a lot of use cases, a lot of integrations, languages, anything you might be trying to do on CodeShip, including, as you can see here, docs for getting started with Percy that you can follow beginning to end if you're trying to emulate this webinar and get going with CodeShip today. So we definitely recommend checking out the documentation for more info than we're going to cover just now. Now, on the next slide, I want to highlight that there are really two key ways to use CodeShip. There's a UI-driven configuration, and then there's a config as code-driven configuration. So what we see here is the UI-driven configuration, and you'll see this in a little more detail in the demo. All you have to do in this world is drop your setup commands into that little web terminal box you see there. You'll drop your test commands in as well, and your automated continuous integration is set up. It takes just a minute or so. You can also, over on that deploy tab, toggle for deployments that you can configure with just a single push button. So this mode is really meant to get you off the ground with CI/CD as quick as possible. We do have a mode you can mature into or start with if you have somewhat more complex needs, and that would be our config as code or YAML-driven options you see here on the next slide. In this format, you just write straightforward YAML files to define first what we see here, which is our services. This is going to be powered by Docker containers. So everything you're trying to do, we use a syntax heavily borrowed from Docker Compose so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And you would just define every service or a service for anything you need inside of your builds and pipelines. So any tool, integration, SDK, as long as you can put that in a Docker container and orchestrate it here, you can use it in your CI/CD jobs. The next slide is the counterpart to this YAML file. This is the steps YAML file, where you actually define what happens in a build run. You can see it's a very straightforward syntax. In this case, I'm passing a couple Percy commands to a Rails app service. And these two YAML files that we just looked at, the previous slide and this slide, make up the definition of your environment and your build pipelines in CodeShip's config as code model. And again, you can use either CodeShip configuration with the UI or the config as code, or you can use both depending on exactly what you need per project in your organization. And there's a lot more detail to both, so I definitely encourage you to check out the documentation or get in touch or ask a question here at the end of the webinar if you'd like to learn more. But again, CodeShip is very simple to help you get going with tools like Percy and your continuous integration experience. And now I think I'll let David jump into a demo.
All right, thank you, Ethan. So hopefully the demo gods are with us today. So let's go take a look at something here. Okay, so yeah, what we're going to do today in the demo is we're going to take an example project that has an application running in it, and we're going to add it to Percy. Add Percy to it. And so we'll take you through the steps of how do you kind of take a project and sprinkle Percy into it. And we're going to get that running in CodeShip. We're going to get continuous integration working, and we'll go over what changes you need to make as well to get Percy running with CodeShip too. And yeah, then we're going to make a change, a high-level change to kind of get a feel for like what it's like to develop with Percy with running each time. So here we have a very simple example project that has this package called the To-Do MVC app. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. So I'm just going to, probably the easiest way to just show it is we'll just fire this up here, and we'll jump into project. So it's just a simple to-do app, and you can write messages or put to-dos in here and check them off. So very, very basic. And so we have this application that's working, and I've actually added some tests to this as well. And so let's just go through this. So yeah, these tests use a library called Puppeteer, which is a package that's provided by the Google Chrome team. It's an official package that allows you to control Chrome remotely. And so this particular test here, we have, we're describing the to-do MVC app, and before each test here, we're launching a browser and opening a new page in that browser. And after each one, we're just closing the browser. And then we have two very simple tests here. The first one is simply just to check that the app is indeed loading on the test URL, and that we have the container that we expect there. And so we just assert that that container exists. And the second test here actually goes ahead and goes to the page and types in a new to-do, like what I just did in the browser, hits enter, and then we assert that there should be at least, well, there should be exactly one to-do saved there. So yeah, we can run these tests locally, and you can get a quick feel for that. So we've got those two tests there. Okay, so yeah, what we're going to do is go ahead now and add some snapshots to this. This sort of test framework here is limited. It's limited in what we've written out here, and it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't test quite a lot of stuff actually. It doesn't know about any visual changes that are being made necessarily. So let's go ahead and add Percy to this. So the first thing that we're going to do is we have an SDK, Percy Puppeteer. So we're going to, because these are Puppeteer tests, we're going to add that. So I'm just going to go ahead and install that. And while that's running, the second thing that we need to do is that once the SDK has been added, which we can see it showing up here in the dev dependencies, the script that you have running to run your tests, you need to wrap it in a Percy exec command. And so what this does is it runs your tests as exactly as you had it before, except we kind of like wrap your test run in our binary, which is creating a Percy build, and it's listening for snapshots to be taken, and then closes down automatically at the end. So anyone familiar with like bundle exec, for example, and the Ruby community might be familiar with this sort of syntax. And this Percy command comes from something called Percy Agent, which is incorporated into our SDK down the bottom here. Okay, so we've done that. And the next thing is we need to tell Percy like where would we like to take some snapshots of our application. So the first step to that is requiring and including here the Percy snapshot helper function, and you get that from the Percy Puppeteer package. Okay. Yes, and then we would like to this is not really enough to start taking snapshots. We need to explicitly say like where would we like to snapshot things in which state. So just as a general rule, it kind of makes sense to add this at the bottom of your test most of the time. Not necessarily but often. So we can take a Percy snapshot down here, and yeah, as my text editor is pointing out here, is that the arguments that you have to pass in are the page. This is specific to Percy Puppeteer that's being used, so that correlates to the page that we've created in the browser, and a name for the test. So you can enter in anything you want here. For this one, you might have index or whatever, but because we're using Mocha in this particular test suite, there's actually a really useful helper that is this.test.fullTitle. And what that does is it basically like automatically generates a title for this test based on the fact that we've got a describe block up here, and then this is nested inside here. So we'll concatenate those together. The name is quite important because it has to be consistent across tests so that we know when you are developing your products, like which snapshots to compare against. And so this is, you can kind of think about this as like the key to a snapshot. There are also some other arguments here that you can pass in. We have some widths that are available and other arguments. So if you were not happy with the default widths, you can also go ahead and specify whatever you want in here. So I don't know, we could do, just follow the example shown here. Okay, so that's all it takes to start taking snapshots. And same with this one here. We probably should snapshot this one. So this is kind of cool because it's actually gone ahead and like added a to-do to the list here. And so it probably makes a lot of sense to snapshot that after we've added it. And for this one, I'm just going to leave these options off just to show you like this is really the minimal kind of command here that's good for this test suite. And yeah, this is, oh, one more thing actually. We need to wait on both of these. So this is really it in terms of getting this set up from a code standpoint. One thing that we do need to do is over in CodeShip here. So I have previously set up this project to have to run in CI. And just to quickly go over, I know Ethan covered this a little bit in his slides. For this particular project, this is all it took for me to actually get this running in CI, which is kind of mind-boggling to me. But basically, we have to install Percy Agent globally in this case to get this particular command available. And we install the dependencies using npm CI, and then we configured one pipeline to just run the npm test. And so, and that's resulted in some things working here. But the one thing that we need to add now is an environment variable for telling Percy, like, hey, this is the project that we would like to create builds for. And so I have this project set up over here in Percy. And if we go to the project settings and scroll down a little bit, there's this environment variables for CI. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, and we'll drop it directly into here and set this up. Cool. So that's set up. Going back to our code, we can do a quick review of the changes here. So we included the Percy Puppeteer library. We prepended our test run script here with Percy exec, and we imported the Percy snapshot function here. And then we have dropped in some spots where we'd like to take those snapshots. So I'm going to go ahead and commit that now. All right. So if we go back to our project, we can see that CodeShip has already kicked off this build. It's running.
Just real quick, David, while we wait for that, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit maybe a little bit more about that exec command you ran through real quick, and maybe other things users might want to do with it.
Yeah, yeah. So this is kind of interesting. Yeah, we kind of needed to work out a way to, like when you run Percy exec, what it's actually doing is it's starting up a service in the background, and it's starting it up during the time that this sub-process is being run. When you run these snapshot calls here, it's actually communicating with that service, and that service has to be running in the background the whole time in order for that to happen. And then once we realize that the sub-process is exited here, we know, like, cool, we can wrap up this build now, it's finished. And start, you know, that's an important step for us to understand, like, when a build starts and when it finishes. So yeah, this is one way that we sort of paradigm that we came up with to allow us to sort of integrate with any existing command that you might have. You know, the counter to this of not doing this is like starting up, you know, adding more code to your setup here. Like you could have started like Percy Agent maybe before all of your tests and finish them afterwards or something. But this is like a very elegant way of getting the setup and making minimal changes with your existing test command here.
Awesome, thanks.
Cool, so that's all finished. And yeah, if we look at the output of the Npm Test Run here, we can see that we can basically see what we were just chatting about in sequence. So Percy exec started up here, and you can see it immediately created a build and started the service. And then our tests started running, and these are the communication points to Percy Agent running in the background. And then the tests finished here, and then we stopped Percy and waited for the snapshots to complete, and then finalized the build here. So yeah, really, really useful to have. So yeah, I guess we could just go and take a look at this build. And yeah, so here's what we've got. So we dropped in 2 snapshot calls, and you can see that this.test.fullTitle kind of working nicely here. And these are new snapshots, so because we just added Percy to our setup, and so there's nothing to compare on the original, but then on the new here, you clearly see like, hey, here's that test that had, you know, accepts a new to do, and so we filled this out, hit enter, and then now it's here, and we've got the screenshot for that. And yeah, it's, you know, right away you can start to get a feel for like the extra things that we're now testing because we're looking at this visually. The test that I came up with before, which is a pretty common thing to test here, is like count the to-do lists sort of you know, items and check that they're equal to 1, which is this sort of list here. But there are other really subtle things here that you're seeing, like you know, 1 item left, for example. Like we didn't have a test for that before. So now we've got visual coverage on that, and if we, I don't know, accidentally broke that count, now we'll just automatically get coverage for that. So it's pretty cool. And you can see that we've tested at multiple responsive widths, and we also have tested up here in Firefox and in Chrome. And so there's some, if I sort of swap between the two, there's some subtle differences there, which is really interesting. So it's great to catch all of this stuff every time. Okay, so now we have this sort of baseline established. What I'd like to do is show a example of like adding a new feature, and we'll create a pull request and see what that looks like. So I'm going to create a branch here, and we'll call this like, I don't know, like styled title. And I'm just going to go over here to make a very simple change here. I'm going to go to the index file, and I'm just going to like update the style. So let's make the font weight bold, and how about we make the color green. Cool, so I'll go ahead and commit that. And we'll go ahead and push that new branch. All right, and so while that's running, I'm going to go ahead and create a pull request for this. So we'll go and do that. And I'm just going to make the base to be the demo here. So you can see that change I just made. And let's just go ahead and create a pull request for this. All right, so this pull request is right away got CI running on it with CodeShip, so that's cool. And let's go take a look over here, see what it's up to. All right, so it's already checked out the code, building the container here. And over on Percy's side, we can also watch this come in.
One thing I'll note while it's running on the CodeShip side is we're seeing the build run live, and it's been pretty speedy in this example. But there are, of course, lots of ways that on your side, if you were a CodeShip user, you can optimize that build time through doing some things in parallel, through caching. So even though we can see it here being pretty speedy, while we wait for a build, it feels like a good time to bring up. You have a lot of ways you can boost that even further and customize it.
All right, so let's see what goes on here. See if we've got any action. All right, so it's kicked off the test command, and I'm just going to have a look at the Percy project here. Yeah, so we've got a pending build already happening. It's already processing visual differences now. So now it's starting to take the screenshots and creating the visual diffs from this. All right, cool. So yeah, now we can see the new screenshots here, and yeah, we've got this change to do. And with the new title, actually this didn't quite come up exactly the way I want. So what I'm going to do, just because of the way that I set up this, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and change this back. Or let's change the color to red. Oops, what happened there? Cool. Okay. Awesome. Cool. So then over here on the pull request, if we refresh this, and you can actually see the previous commit that I made there has come up with the get status showing that there's two things to be reviewed here, and that had the two visual diffs that we're looking at before. So I've just pushed another one here because I didn't quite set that up right. Just waiting for that to come in. We can go take a look at the build. Oh, I'll jump in here. Cool. Yeah, so the flows, hopefully you get a feel for the flow that you get as a developer, being able to be able to see all of these changes visually. I kind of like made this change and changed this title to green without even really looking at the application. And while this is a pretty trivial example, I think that it really feels kind of awesome, and it feels like a bit of a superpower to be able to see all of this automatically each time. And yeah, you just end up, I actually personally end up in a state where I don't check things as often because I know that Percy's got it already. And yeah, we sort of get that when building, because we obviously use Percy to build Percy. And yeah, it's just such a great flow to have. So all right, so the second one is in here now. So just wait for this to come in. It's receiving the build. Oh, get back over here. Cool, looks like it's done. Yeah, so we made another change here, and yeah, you can see that we've updated our snapshots to show that. For some reason, I've made a mistake here, and so what I wanted to show you was the visual diffs that you get between these two things. So I'm just actually going to jump over to our own Percy project, Percy Web, and just give you a sample of that. So, oh, and actually before we do that, back over here on the Percy build, so yeah, we've marked this as red, and if we go ahead and look at that build, and let's see, I'm not logged in on that view. Crap. Okay, we can go here if we're happy with these changes and hit approve. And when we go have a look here, we can see that the GitHub status has been changed and that we can merge this pull request. So at that point, you know exactly what's visually changed in, with this code change. And yeah, you know with full confidence at this point what you're about to ship to your production environment. So just going back to have a look at some of Percy's builds. So if we have a look at, I don't know, let's go take a look at this one here. Or how about, actually get something better. Old dashboard. That's probably a good one. Yeah, so we recently updated our org dashboard, for example, and you can see the visual diffs that we're getting from the old and the new over here too. So yeah, in this case, we've made some, clearly made some indentation changes, and it's clearly been surfaced in these visual diffs. So very, very useful to have. This is a pretty wide sweeping change, actually, this one. Yeah, this is the kind of visual diff that you get to see. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead now and I can merge that pull request. Being very happy with what visual changes that have been made there, and yeah, that's pretty much the demo. So let's go back here. And yeah, time for sort of back to you, Max, and time for some Q&A.
All right, thanks, David. We do have some questions that came in. So this first one is a bit of a two-parter. I'm going to ask you the first part and then follow up with the second. Can you specify which browsers you want to run tests on, either at the test or test run level? For example, Chrome only or Chrome and Firefox?
So you can't at the test level, you can't. You can per project, and yeah, so you can configure, you could run Firefox only or Chrome only or both. That's not configurable at kind of like your Percy Snapshot level. Yeah, there's a good reason for that. And I think that the question is kind of interesting because I actually wouldn't usually recommend that you kind of take that approach. It makes much more sense to test everything all the time because otherwise you're making kind of assumptions about whether you think that a certain issue is not going to show up in a certain browser, for example. So it's when Percy catches those surprises that and it's the sort of the width of the net that we're covering that really helps you catch those issues. And if you're controlling that kind of manually, it's yeah, I think you would end up missing stuff. So that's why we do it that way. But yeah, you can do it by project.
All right. The second part of this has been asked by a few people. So on top of that, is there support or are there plans to support additional browsers?
Good question. Very relevant question. Yeah, so initially we actually started off with just Firefox, and we have added Chrome, and yeah, we do plan to add more browsers in the future. So I can't say anything as to exactly or make any promises as exactly which browsers those are, but yes, we will definitely be expanding the browser lineup that we have.
All right, and just so everyone knows, you can continue to ask as we go. If any answer makes you think of something else, please add a follow-up. Or even if you feel like we don't answer one fully, please add a follow-up. So here's another. I've done snapshot testing in the past, but there were lots of false positives. What do you do to combat those?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So sometimes you can have false positives when you have some data on a snapshot that might change each time. So it's pretty common, for example, to have a library that is giving you fake data into your tests, like Faker and that kind of thing. And that will result in the data that's going into your test being different each time. And so that's going to surface visual diffs each time. And so there's like a lot of common workarounds for that. One way to work around that is to a lot of the libraries like Faker and other libraries like that have a seed that you can set, and that will make sure that the order of the data that's being shown, the fake data that's being shown, is consistent each time, and that reduces the sort of unintended visual diffs that you will inevitably see when you have that kind of setup.
All right, let's move on to the next one here. Can I use Percy to test component libraries?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have support for a bunch of different component libraries through our SDKs. And while I showed you today Puppeteer and basically taking snapshots of full web pages, you can absolutely just do the exact same thing but send individual components to us, and especially those components in different states as well. Yeah, it's important to be able to do that. People also use Percy for testing things like their design systems and so forth to get really good coverage over over the entire library of components and styles that they have organized for their product.
All right. Is it possible to take a snapshot of a section of a page based on its CSS, for example, a certain div? Or does Percy only take snapshots of complete pages?
Okay. Good question. So you can, it's kind of like I mentioned just before, you can, one would absolutely argue that a component and component library testing is taking snapshots of of a portion of a page. In that case, you don't even know where those snapshots those components are going to show up. So depending on the SDK, we can take, we're essentially taking portions of a page or an individual component that way. There's no support at the moment, and actually we probably won't be adding support for taking any arbitrary page and snapshotting some portion of it. It would be better to for you to structure your tests in a way that broke down that page in the way that you would like for snapshotting, and then send us an HTML page or that contains just that component and all of the resources that that make up that page to be rendered.
All right, couple more here. Keep them coming, everyone, as you think of them. Will this slow my tests down?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and something that we pay attention to a fair bit. It's we have a hugely parallelized setup where, and fairly optimized setup where we are pretty careful about the impact that we have on your test suite. And yeah, I think that there's quite a number of tricks that we use under the hood to asynchronously process the snapshots that you're sending to us. So not only kind of the capturing side of when you take a Percy snapshot, we're having to capture enough information to be able to snapshot that in our infrastructure. And so a lot of that is very parallelized within Percy Agent, that agent process that's running in the background while your tests are being running. And then there's the processing of the Percy build itself, which is also extremely parallelized to, as you've seen, like one snapshot call can result in many browsers, many browser widths. And so we've parallelized that as well. Yeah, we pay pretty close attention to that, and it's probably going to have a small impact, but we've optimized it as much as we can to reduce that. The sort of flip side of this is that adding snapshots and doing visual testing kind of allows you to potentially not test other things too, because it is a very high value test to be taking. So in the example that I gave where you had some functional tests and we added a snapshot to when you add a to-do, and they were checking like whether it was in the list or not afterwards. You've got to wonder, like, is it even worth now running that other test to check the contents of that list, because it's already covered well in the screenshot. So yeah, so it may have an effect on what you decide to test or not based on that, and the value that you get back from taking the snapshots and getting the visual diffs out of it are really, really high. So it's also adding a tremendous amount of value there.
All right. So it looks like one or two more here. Do you have any deals for open source projects?
Yes. Yeah, so a couple of things on that note. It is free to use Percy. You can get started for free and have access to 5,000 snapshots per month. So if you just want to introduce Percy to your project, you can do that for free. We also have tools to make it so that your Percy builds are open and public too. So if you have a open source project that you have people working on and you need to have an open discussion about the visual differences that are going on, then yeah, it's really, really useful to have a public build available so that everyone can see kind of what you're talking about there. So we've made that a lot easier for various open source projects. The Shopify Polaris project is a pretty interesting example of that. And the Google Amp project is another example of that, where there's lots of builds and lots of people checking out these builds to understand what's visually changed there.
All right, one more. Do you support CodeShip Pro? And what about parallel builds?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we didn't cover CodeShip Pro today in the demo, but as Ethan sort of outlined some of the configuration and how you might go about doing that. So yes, we absolutely support CodeShip Pro. In terms of parallel builds, we also support parallel builds. So that's the short of it. We have we're kind of discussing the cost of running Percy on your test suite earlier, and this absolutely correlates to that as well. So if you like any test suite eventually gets slow if you have a single threaded kind of run, serial run there. So when you parallelize your test, Percy can also support that right out of the box with CodeShip. So it will be easy to migrate to that kind of model if you were going from one to the other, or maybe you've already got a parallelized set up there. So and there's more documentation about that on our website if folks want to have a look at that.
All right, well, thank you, David. That's all the time we have for today, and thank you, Ethan, of course, as well. Do either of you have anything you want to leave as parting thoughts? All right.
I'll jump in and remind everyone that both CodeShip and Percy have free plans, so they're very easy to try out to get started. And we're happy to help you from there get in touch with support, or feel free to ask us any questions if we can assist.
All right.
Yeah, and as I kind of alluded to before, yeah, absolutely free to get started with Percy. Yeah, 5,000 free snapshots you can take if you're looking to get started and get some initial visual testing going there. And then our plans start at $29 a month, our paid plans and go up from there.
Great, thank you both. Thanks everyone for hanging out and watching. The survey is about to pop up for you, and we'll talk to you again real soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
So, bye.